Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for another video celebrating the 9 years of The Last of Us, which has very recently marked the 9th year since its initial release on the PlayStation 3. This game launched to so much success in the last leg of the console race between the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 that it wound up becoming the deciding factor in what boosted the PlayStation 3 to its final victory over the Xbox 360. Originally, for this celebration, I planned on hiring out the screening room at my university, but it would turn out that you can't use the equipment in there for playing games. Suppose that's why they call it a screening room. Now, with that plan having to be cancelled, I'm instead going to take this time to give you an in-depth look at the pre-production of Last of Us. It was an essay I wrote for college, which earned extremely high marks, by the way. But once that's all wrapped up, I'll go on to talk about my personal love for this game, and I won't be alone. My friend ShadowDragon is a massive Last of Us fan, I'm talking even bigger than myself, so it felt only right to give him the opportunity to jump onto this video to talk about the game as well. Afterward, we are going to look towards the future of Last of Us, so I hope you enjoy the video. Introduction. This here part of the essay is extremely outdated since I wrote this over 2 years ago, so ignore all of the text that you see before you on screen and instead listen to the wonderful sounds of my voice as I commentate over the outdated information to, of course, update you on the situation that The Last of Us has befallen. But without further ado, The Last of Us is a PlayStation exclusive action-adventure survival horror game developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony, hence the exclusivity to PlayStation. It was originally released on June 14, 2013 after it was in development since October of 2009 for the PlayStation 3. The game was later remastered for the PlayStation 4, accurately entitled The Last of Us Remastered, and released on PlayStation Store on April 9, 2014, the same day as Naughty Dog announced it, following rumours of its release the previous month. Now, despite the previously established name of The Last of Us, this realistically wasn't the end for the game's universe, since The Last of Us was initially announced by Naughty Dog in the PlayStation Experience of 2016 alongside the teaser trailer for the game. So I find that kind of interesting how it's almost been 4 years since we got that original teaser trailer, and only just now are we actually getting the finalized game, mind you, which originally its release date was supposed to be around 2019, but it of course got delayed until May 29th of 2020, which during this time, unfortunately, all of the distributors for the game were out of work because all of their workers were either off sick or self-isolating due to a certain COVID-19 spreading across the planet. So kind of ironic about a game, kind of ironic even how a game about a virus got delayed because of the virus. Regardless, now the distributors have of course got back on track with their work and everything, and so the game has been distributed to all of the physical electronic stores so that then now people can pick up the game physically, as well as any of the physical merchandise on the day of release, which is due to be slated for June 19th of 2020 all the same. And who knows, maybe this delay was a blessing in disguise, because in 2019 The Last of Us 2 would have had a lot of competition when it came to not even just PlayStation exclusives, just games in general. There was a lot of big games that year that could have came out to compete against The Last of Us 2. And of course, delaying it from May 29th of this year is also a blessing in disguise, potentially, since otherwise the game would have had to have competed with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which also came out on May 29th of 2020. So it would have meant that owners of both the Switch and the PS4 would have most likely had to choose between both of the games. However, with both of the games now being released in separate weeks, I'm sure other people are able to get them both, just like myself. But that's basically going to do it for the introduction, so now we get to move on to the earliest concepts to the story, and this is going to really tackle the themes of failure, which I merely only alluded to during my review for the game. Neil Druckmann studied at Carnegie Mellon University in 2004 when he participated in a competition regarding George Romero, known to many as the father of modern zombie movies. Regarding the students created a game concept that would be pitched to him. From there, Romero would choose his favourite and the team behind it would produce a prototype. Druckmann's idea was to merge three of the works that influenced him as a creator. The game would feature gameplay inspired by the PlayStation 2 classic Ico, a lead character much like John Hartigan from Sin City, and set during the zombie apocalypse like Romero's Night of the Living Dead. This early concept revolved around a cop who would protect a young girl in this apocalyptic world full to the brim of zombies. But this cop, however, had a heart condition, and when his heart would play up, the player would instead take control of the girl, reversing the roles of our main protagonists. Unfortunately, this concept didn't win, hence began Druckmann's story of failure. The idea of these characters got shelved, but nearly a decade later, that core concept was reborn for The Last of Us. Druckmann started work for Naughty Dog as a developer, but he still wished to return to this idea. What's another way I can explore these characters, he asked himself. He soon took inspiration from a comic book of the Turn-In. Here the roles of these characters would change, so the cop became a criminal who became a young girl's protector. But at the end, however, the girl would save his life after he's captured by some former criminal partners. He completed the script for a six-issue story arc even, with his plan to write and draw this comic book in his spare time. But his pitch to the indie comic book publisher, that's the literal name of the company too, indie comic book publisher even. But this pitch once again failed as they just weren't interested enough in the idea. Druckmann still worked at Naughty Dog alongside Bruce Straley, and they would often discuss concepts, including the idea of a vulnerable character and their protector who eventually switched roles. Here, ideas also developed for a third player who was muted, making their main form of interaction through her actions with the other characters, i.e. through sign language that you yourself as the player would conduct. The idea was that everything that happens between you is based on gameplay mechanics, or the whole shebang of it, Druckmann stated. At the same time, both of these men became fascinated by cordyceps fungi, which eventually became the inspiration behind the infected for the game, which again I alluded to in the review of the game I released last week, but we'll get even further into that later on. For now, we're going to look at how the two of them merged their ideas to come up with a single game concept known as Mankind, coincidentally enough the same name as a store here in the UK. Regardless, this was going to be set in a world where cordyceps had leaped from insects to humans, turned the infected into dangerous monsters, bringing down civilization with them. But in this concept idea, the virus only affected women, unlike the final idea for The Last of Us. But Ellie in these early concepts was the only female who was immune, so Joel would protect her to bring her to a lab where a cure would potentially be created. But they weren't able to sell the idea, especially after many female Naughty Dog employees voiced their concerns. The reason it failed is because it was a misogynistic idea, Druckmann claimed. And that's because it's also incredibly sexist, because it's one thing to have a disease that only impacts females, because we have those in real life. It's not that much of a groundbreaking offense. You know, men can't exactly get cervical cancer, considering that they don't have cervical organs. But the thing with this concept is that you would be a big strong man going around beating the shit out of female zombies. Yeah, how's that for gender roles for you? You know, we can't have big strong women because they're too busy being scared and worried about the virus, whilst the big strong men go out to take down all the zombies. That is the sexist part, and that's why, of course, many female Naughty Dog employees would have voiced their concerns as what was within their rights. Finally came 2010, the idea that would stem into The Last of Us was settled upon, but this initial pitch for The Last of Us failed, as it just wasn't honest, claimed Druckmann, as pacing and character development still wasn't fleshed out enough for the final game. So in other words, this was their third pitch, and yet again it failed, because if you're keeping track, he pitched it to Romario during his university days in 2004, 5 years before the game even started the development cycle in October of 2009. Then it also failed again to the indie comic book publisher, and then it failed again in this initial pitch to Naughty Dog themselves. Now, the problem stemmed from the fact that Joel became this fatherly figure to Ellie too soon in the course of the game, a problem that of course was solved in the finalised game, which is what makes the finalised game such a masterpiece, because the relationship between them two builds slowly and realistically, so you can truly invest in their relationship because it doesn't feel forced or rushed in any form or another. Anyway, they would still harken back to the earlier concepts, to where at the end of the game, Joel would remain incapacitated, so you would need to take control of Ellie, and she would need to kill in order to save him, hence the role reversal took place. Whilst these repeated failures did discourage Druckmann, it was actually the best thing that could have happened to him. Blessing in disguise, as I keep saying throughout this video. As Druckmann said, there's something about how we view failure at Naughty Dog as a positive thing. If you learn something, the idea to fail as much as you can, early on, because of all those failures, lead you to better answers. Had we gone forward with those original ideas, the game would have been weaker for it. So yeah, Druckmann's effectively saying that if these pitches were far more lenient and these original ideas, these less fleshed out ones, were to go forward, then the game could have been rushed, and it never would have been as finalised or as good as the final product turned out to be. Therefore, the failure in this case worked out fantastically well in order to create the masterpiece that is Last of Us to this day. And at the same time, Druckmann could have been far too discouraged from these 3 failures and given up on the project altogether, but he was determined and passionate in this project, so he took the feedback very, very well. He took it in a positive manner, like he said in the quote before you, and he just improved the game to help it turn into what it is today. The initial ending was scrapped, whilst the idea of Joel getting Ellie to the lab for a cure to be created remained, but for this cure to be made, Ellie would have to die, and so Joel's parental instincts kick in and he saves her from the lab, creating a controversial ending for sure, but one that has a really open interpretation. What does Ellie do next? Does she really believe him? Druckmann explained the ending as Ellie waking up for the first time and realising that she can't rely on him anymore. She knows that she has to leave him and make her own decisions and her own mistakes. Turning Ellie into this capable, strong character was no accident. I had this secret agenda, Druckmann stated. I wanted to create one of the coolest, non-sexualized female protagonists in video game history, and I felt that if we did that, there's an opportunity to change the industry, which I know sounds pretentious, but that was my goal. And his ambition served him well, because Ellie was very much everything that he hoped she could become. You know, you have Ellie cosplayers going to conventions because of how much they love the character and want to dress up with her, dress up like her, even in how inspired they are by her traits and her relationship to Joel, her strength and her independence and everything. And better yet, she's a female video game character that doesn't need to be sexualized, and to be honest, if she was sexualized, considering she's like 12 years old, that would be kind of inappropriate and freaky, so, you know, that's another reason why I'm glad Ellie could have been created with no sexualization to her whatsoever. So that just truly shown everyone within the gaming industry that yes, this can be done. We can have badass, strong, independent female video game characters that aren't sexualized. So yes, definitely a turning point for the franchise, and there's another reason, or a turning point for the industry even, but there's another reason why this game and this franchise is so amazing and such a groundbreaking piece of software, so to say. Storyboarding. Before production could even begin, a story would have to be fleshed out and developed as part of pre-production. This would include ideas about characters, locations, and plot strings the game would follow. Now, the storyboard is just a way of summarizing all of this information visually to help give animators and programmers a sense of direction when creating the game. So what about that planning and writing took place before all of that storyboarding? Well, right off the bat, Naughty Dog had struggles with making a realistic and believable world, as they wanted nothing in the universe to be seen as a monster. The initial draft saw the spread of an infection that killed people, meaning the story that would ensue afterwards would involve humans dealing with a post-apocalyptic society, and the plot would focus on how these people survive. Soon it was realised that tackling this time frame within the story's events made it hard for an action game to be made, since storytelling in that genre was told through gameplay, not through narrative-based cutscenes, unlike the other game genres such as RPGs, adventure and shooter games. Although there still were plans for cutscenes, since that was still the best way to execute the game's narrative. But Naughty Dog wanted an adventure game, hence the gameplay was made to be the main focus in the execution of the narrative. Having the infection taken out, as this was the time in which the game was originally going to take place, was causing the problem that this story could be executed in any gameplay manner that the action genre is so typically known for. Rather, it would have had to have been more cutscene based to tell its story, so they simply changed where the game would take place in the plot storyline to add the infected back in, and so the game soon became about how you fighting the infected, rather than dealing with the aftermath of the fight between the infected and the surviving humans. So as a player, you can see the threat that people face in this world, and you can feel the experience of it for yourself, drawing you further into the game's world. But having this narrative developed through gameplay, just like other typical action games, rather than just cutscenes, and that's how you would experience this world for yourself, so to say. With basic grip on when the story would take place, more detailed plot, location and character elements could be planned out and written, hence storyboarding soon followed. Point is, games don't just stick with their first idea and then roll with it, they go through several variations and iterations before finally settling on the best idea after many different ideas have been discussed and circulated around the entire development team, and then they finally decide maybe on the 100th, 150th draft between a lot of them what the best direction to take the game is going to be. Of course, from all of these initial 100, 150 drafts, they do still keep certain elements in, like the role reversal, which we saw after Joel got incredibly injured and we had to utilise Ellie during the snowy section of the game in order to hunt down deer and deal with infected zombies, as well as evil bastards out to, of course, take down Joel and Ellie. So, very interesting execution of the role reversal there, which Druckmann wanted in his game so desperately. But moving on, we're going to talk about comic books. As we've seen from previous topics, Neil Druckmann didn't always dream of turning this story into a video game. Once he dreamed of writing it as a 6-issue comic book series called The Tune-In. As his dream shifted from comic book writer to game designer several times, and that kind of shows to all of you youngers out there who still don't know what you want to do. Not even adults know what they want to do in life, you know, some adults turn the age of 30, 35 and still don't know what they want to do with their life, so don't feel pressured to know all the answers and know what path you want to take in future life, because you never know what the future holds for you. So, in other words, roll with it, have some sort of plan for sure, but don't be too disappointed if things don't shape out, because there's always a new opportunity around the corner. As I digress with my inspirational speech even, his ideas were rejected by the indie comic book publisher, as we know already, but comic books weren't entirely out of Druckmann's reach. After the game's rise to acclaim, co-writer and cartoon artist Faith Erin Hinks, most well known for Friends with Boys and Demonology 101, helped Druckmann publish a 4-issue miniseries called Last of Us American Dreams, which served as a prequel to the game. So after so much failure on both fronts with his story, failing to pitch it as a comic book and failing to pitch it as a game, Druckmann finally achieved what he had dreamed of so fondly for all those years, a game and comic book series based on his idea of cordyceps fungi spreading to humans and creating a apocalyptic society. Another addition made to the game was the addition of collectible comic books as a tribute to Druckmann's earlier aspirations for the series, so that's why comic books are such a prevalent collectible within the finalized game, mind you. Now we're going to talk about the inspiration behind the infected creatures, which we have alluded to this whole time. So as previously looked upon, plot elements for the game needed to be developed and fleshed out, and only then could storyboarding begin. Of course, the ideas behind these plot elements were inspired from somewhere, so this slide is going to look at what inspired The Last of Us when it comes to their story, characters, and locations. Again, these elements were all previously established. An early inspiration for the infected creatures came from a BBC Planet documentation, or documentary even, on cordyceps fungi, as you can see pictured to the left, where a fungi infects an insect and takes over its brain. The question soon became, what if this could happen to humans? How would people react? How would this change our society? To make humans appear as they were infected if they alienated them. But Naughty Dog strived for something original rather than something similar to zombies. Fortunately, one artist mashed together what an abnormal human would look like with real-life disease and fungal overgrowth. Fungi then became the focus point behind the designs of these infected, as inspired by the cordyceps fungi. To us, it's scarier when things in the world are somewhat benignant or beautiful, quoted the artist, and more natural, if I can add in my own flair, because natural things are also the most terrifying, because natural things give you the idea of the theme that they can't be stopped, that they will run you through, just like Mother Nature, mind you. From there, the character artist created a full biological cycle of the infected. This way, each stage of the infection could be seen, helping us as a player to learn just how worse it got over time. Also discussed was the movement the infected would take, as well as how they would be killed. These tropes did take inspirations from zombies, as they could only be killed by headshots. However, unlike zombies, they could walk and moved using an echolocation generated by a clicking noise, as their eyes were rendered useless since the infection splitted the face in two. The final stage of the biological cycle was called the bloater, where the body is replaced with fungal plates and completely takes over the blood and blooms, making the body covered in things that have been growing inside of them. When the infected sensed that they were on the cusp of death, they fell into a quiet, dark corner as they became part of the environment, and so the body was consumed, and the fungal sprouts and spores began to help spread the infection. This stage, of course, linking back to the real, alive fungal infection, making the world created in this game all the more believable. This makes the world in and of itself within The Last of Us, as it's fueled by its own characters, which took inspiration from the book The World Without Us, which describes in detail how much fighting humans do to prevent the course of nature overwhelming them, although in the end nature always wins, as I was alluding to when I was talking about Mother Nature and all that. Anyway, and what it would mean if they lost that fight any day of the week, what would result in nature taking back its full-blown course. Naughty Dog also researched into how temples were ruined in the Uncharted series and added those aesthetics to American cities, with several experimental pieces of concept art for the locations of the game, looking as how the cities changed and how nature had conquered them. And of course, taking this research into the Uncharted series makes total sense from Naughty Dog's perspective, because they are the ones who developed Uncharted, so it's kind of like a cross-platform collaboration with people who worked on Uncharted also working on The Last of Us. So basically, these core elements of the characters and locations existed in the plot were inspired by real-life fungi and disease, books on nature and the Earth's natural course and biological cycles, as well as previous games made by Naughty Dog. Now we're going to talk about the development for Ellie. Now, Ellie is an interesting part to the story in the development of this game, from concept to final product. Ellie started as an innocent character with a big twist ending where she'd take her first human life at the very end, which made for a much more passive character in the game's combat sequences, which is what the story was told through, which is why the time in which the game takes place was altered as we learned of previously, and because of that you didn't get as much attachment to the character, so Ellie was made into much more of a fighter, assisting you heavily in combat scenarios. Once Naughty Dog had finally settled on this direction, the ending wasn't clear. Originally, Joel and Ellie were destined to settle down in San Francisco and help other survivors rebuild society, very similar to The Walking Dead, although The Walking Dead isn't based in San Francisco, it's based in Virginia. But Druckmann didn't want such a hopeful ending for such a dark game, so that was what led to the game's controversial ending. Druckmann wrote the ending to purposefully split fans as to whether Joel made the right choice, choosing Ellie over mankind and possibly dooming them to extinction for the sake of the few, that being Ellie, mind you. So when it comes to the financing of games, most of the time they are extremely confidential and most information can't be found online. But what games must be financed for is to produce the tools, talent and marketing, and all of which are costly. Without money, games just simply cannot be made, so games get the money they need to be made one of three ways. It can either be through private funding, which is funding provided by publishers. Certain publishers do develop their own games in cases like Nintendo and Rockstar, since they have enough money to do so, or public funding, where you pay for the game by yourself and create it as a side project to a normal job, or from crowdfunding, where the public will fund you based on an idea or concept of yours. Examples would include Patreon and Kickstarter. In this case, Naughty Dog got private funding through Sony as they helped back up the project financially. This way, the game could be released under their publication, so PlayStation had the exclusivity rights. It's no surprise come this point that Sony published The Last of Us, as Naughty Dog have been PlayStation developers since their first endeavours into the gaming market with Crash Bandicoot. Unfortunately though, I can't seem to find the game's exact budget online, but it's more than likely, with this being a new IP of Naughty Dog's, that it took around $200 million at the very least, making it one of the most expensive games ever made, and putting it pretty close to the estimated budget of Gran Turismo 5, aka the most expensive game ever made, at $250 million. But was it worth the high cost to make it through? Well, the game was commonly known as one of the best video games with the biggest budgets ever made, showing that Sony backing up this project financially was definitely a wise decision. Facilities and equipment. A mocap studio was required as motion capture was used throughout the game to record facial expressions of the actors for their respective characters in the game. It was able to create more realistic looking cutscenes and animations for our characters at hand. Ashley Johnson is an example of one of these actors using motion capture to help create a more fleshed out character animation and expressions for her character Ellie, likewise for Joel's actor Troy Baker. And of course this would have been expensive, since not only would they need to create the equipment, they would also have had to hire out the studio itself, because I believe that Naughty Dog nor Sony actually owned a mocap studio, hence the hiring requirements, and that would have been quite a costly facility to say the least. Anyway, Naughty Dog did have their own studio for the programming and development side of the game, which took place during the production of the game, and that meant that they was able to use their very own in-house proprietary engine, which if they built up from scratch as they jumped from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 when they were developing the very first Uncharted game. So they decided for The Last of Us to recycle their engine and simply add in a few tweaks to improve the performance of the game, rather than build up an entire new engine from scratch, since building that other engine up previously for Uncharted was described as a nightmare, which they wished to avoid needlessly going through again. So in other words, it was very clever of them to use this previously built up in-game engine, because otherwise they would have spent a lot of time and money into developing a new one where it wasn't needed. So time is money in this industry, and saving that much time is very useful for reducing the game's costs, mind you, so that way they was able to put money for the game's budget into other areas, such as fleshing out the models and the animations of the game even more, and just creating a better marketing ploy for the game to follow. Now, there is a cutscene in the game which utilizes motion capture, as we can see several pieces of equipment was required for the shoot. First and most obviously are multiple cameras used to take shots from many different angles of the scenes, so the best angles could be utilised in the final cutscenes for the game. Tripods were also used to prop the camera up and help keep it still during the shooting of the scene, and electronics like wires were of course used to give the cameras and computers electrical power to operate. And speaking of computers, on set we could also find laptops, computers and monitors. This way we could watch the footage of these actors as they were shooting the take, ensuring it measured up to what they wanted to see from the in-game cutscene. There were also motion capture suits themselves, props such as foam cylinders, which would have been textured within the game's programming to look like pipes or crowbars, for example, part of the game's many melee weapons. And a foam board with little foam props on top to represent the table and the carbon knives found in the corresponding cutscene of the game. There was also many metal bars found around the set to help keep the set from falling on top of the actors. Each actor also had a microphone to ensure their lines were accurately recorded, and the lights were used in the studio to create, well, light. As without light it's pretty difficult to see, both for the personnel and the studio to see each other, and for the cameras to actually pick up anything that's going on. Also, the lighting paralleled the lighting used in the cutscene for the final game, obviously. So we're basically going to check out that clip right now.
Marker?
Thanks for the hot rocks and all. Ellie. Hey, what are you... Joel?
Bill!
What are you doing?
Bill!
Oh my God.
Turn around and get on your knees.
Just calm down a second.
Turn around
All right.
and get on your knees. Don't test me.
Just take it easy.
Any bites? No. Anything sprout?
God damn it, I'm clean!
I see so much as a twitch.
Ugh.
Ow!
Stop!
Son of a bitch!
You done?
Am I done? You come into my house, you set off all my traps, you damn near break my shooting arm. Who the fuck is this punk and what's she doing here?
I am none of your goddamn business. We're here because you owe Joel some favors. You
Oh.
can start by taking these off.
I owe Joel some favors, some kind of joke.
I'll cut to the chase. I need a car.
Well, it is a joke. Joel needs a car. Well, if I had one that works, which I sure as hell don't, what makes you think I'd just give it to you? Huh? Yeah, sure, Joel, go ahead. Take my car. Take all my food, too, while you're at it.
By the looks of it, you could lose some of that food.
You listen to me, you little
No,
shit.
fuck you. You handcuffed
I
me.
need you to shut up. All right?
Whatever favors you think I owe you ain't worth that much.
Actually, Bill, they are.
Well, it don't matter, because I don't have a car that works.
But there is one in this town.
Parts. There are parts in this town.
Meaning that you could fix one up.
All right. I'm gonna do this. There's some gear I'm gonna need. All right. It's on the other side of town. And you help me go gather it, and maybe I can put something together that runs. But after this, I owe you nothing.
That's fine. A couple days from now, we'll probably be dead anyway.
Good. Follow me. Little goddamn town's booby trap. Just stay right on my ass.
Can't listen.
Knock it off.
PlayStation.
But now with that clip out of the way, Things which you can't see in the clip but were necessary to the game's creation are servers for storing the game's data, probably located in an external warehouse somewhere, just in case of a disaster occurring in the main studio, such as a fire, so that then the data could easily be recovered. And software needed to be created for the game, including an in-house engine, programming software, 3D software, most likely Allegro 2 and Lisp, which Naughty Dog used for the Uncharted series, so again utilising software that the team was used to and didn't need to get trained upon, and utilising an in-game engine that was already built up for the first Uncharted game allowed for developers to reduce the time it took to develop the game and ultimately save money in the longer run, money that could have been put towards other things within the game's budgeting cycle. Regardless, they probably would have also used photoshops to make posters that were imported into the game, as well as make posters physically for the marketing campaign that would have took place long after production had finished. All of this equipment and facility hire would have been very expensive, but they helped the game look as great as it did, which helped garner such great success. Personnel. Every video game, despite being digital, needs humans, also known as personnel, to work on the game at hand, including actors to voice, or in this case even act as the characters they are cast for. They also need programmers, publishers, directors, writers, musicians, editors, casters, artists, sound designers, visual effect designers, stuntmen, stuntwomen, camera and electrical engineers, game designers, and animators, just to name a few. These are a lot of professionals in the industry, and in accordance to IMDb, there were at least 180 people who worked on this game. Previously, we looked at facilities and equipment required for this game. Well, this included the mocap studio. Not all cast and crew were required at the motion cap studio, but actors for key characters, so the acting could actually be done. You know, you can't exactly do the acting for these key characters in the motion capture studio without those actors. Then you also would have needed the game designers to ensure the work being done there matched the designs that they created for the games, for publishers to oversee the work being done and make sure it's worth their money, for directors to direct for acting, you know, tell the actors where they want to face, what they want to say, how they want to say it, how they want to look, just generally give them a general sense of movement and speech, directing them, in other words. Who get this, a director directs people. Regardless, they would have also required editors at studio to help them visualize the editing that they'll need to do later on, because at the end of the day, placing a in-game model over some motion capture animations when you didn't actually see those animations performed in real life is much harder than it sounds. So getting that predetermined knowledge is just going to speed up the process and make it so that applying these models to the motion capture animations is going to be a lot more easier for both the editors and animators alike. Then there's also the artists to ensure that, once again, the actors met up with their artwork, the same purpose as for game designers, for visual effect designers, again to ensure that acting is matching up with their effects, and they would also need to be there to perform any visual effects required whilst the act is taking place, such as any smoke screens or anything like that. Now, stuntmen and stuntwomen would be required to do the stunts which the actors could not, because you cannot risk injuring an actor, because in which case you need to postpone the shoot for a few weeks, and time is money, so wasting that time also wastes a lot of money. I can't emphasize that enough. And then you also would have needed the camera and electrical engineers to ensure that the equipment is up and running and working, and of course to fix any technical faults that occur in the moment. And we would have also needed the animators, as previously mentioned, to make sure it's possible to animate the digital video game characters over the real-life actors and make that visualization much more easier for them to imagine going into the animators that they animations even that they would be placing over the top of these real-life actions of the motion capture actors. So the table you see before you is for key members that played a key role in producing this game. There are several actors such as Troy Baker, W. Carl Brown, Ashley Johnson, Brandon Scott, Hannah Haynes, Nadji Jeter, Jeffrey Pierce, Robin Atkin Downs, Annie Wesseling, Ashley Scott, Merle Dandridge, Ruben Langdon, and Nolan North, which Nolan North, interestingly enough, is also someone who voiced Stoic the Vast in for How to Train Your Dragon TV shows, so that name would be recognizable to fans of that franchise such as myself. And then of course we also have directors Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, and Neil Druckmann also was the writer of the game. Now the music was handed down to a very famous conductor, and a very good one at that, which is why the game's music is so damn good, Gustavo Santaolalla. If I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but as we move on, we have editor for the cutscenes, which would have been Ryan M. James. Then casting would have been helmed by Christine Hans and Corbus, without a surname or a nickname to credit him behind. And then there's also a bunch of names behind for artists, for sound designers, for visual effect designers, for stuntmen and stuntwomen, for camera and electrical engineers, and of course the animators. We're going to move on and talk about the contributors. Now, for the most part, it seems as though The Last of Us didn't use many freelance contributors. This is because Naughty Dog itself is a great game developer, which knows what they are doing when it comes to making games, so they don't need to hire any external historians, artists, weapons experts, or writers per se, and they already have the staff on hand to produce most of the game's needs during production. And they also had all of those experts within their respective fields on site, especially after developing Uncharted, which would have required similar personnel, such as artists, historians, and most certainly weapons experts. And the only reason why you need weapons experts is, of course, not to actually use weapons in studio. That's a huge safety hazard, and the publishers would shut down the development of the game, in other words, due to legal problems in that instance. But what you need weapons experts for is ensuring that weapons function correctly and realistically within the game's physics engine. So you'd get a weapons expert in to play the game and just ask them, hey, does this gunshot look real? Does the injury it creates seem realistic? All of that stuff, all the digital side of the weapons to help them create that realistic illusion to them. Because at the end of the day, a game is an illusion, it's not real, it takes place in a digital plane. In fact, it's not even in 3D, it just gives you the illusion of a 3D, which is very, very clever, but not what we're here to talk about today. Now, looking through these examples one by one, Druckmann, of course, would have wrote and directed the game. They had several artists which created the art behind the game, obviously, which helped set up this apocalyptic setting for the game, and because of that, the game didn't really dive into anything historically accurate, since during the time it took place in modern day, and all you need to know to study modern day is to go outside. Yes, get that, gamers don't go outside, but for people who make the games most certainly do. Little gamer stereotype joke right there, but as we move on, which left us with just the weapons expert. But as far as I can tell, they didn't have to hire any of those, as once again they would have had people like that already staffed and under a contract by Naughty Dog, especially since those same people would have needed to work on games like Last of Us, which also use weapons, so they might have already been pre-employed for games like that, and then their talent was just used again for this game at hand. Just to reiterate what I've said already and emphasize it, so to say, repetition for effect and everything. However, as we know from the personnel, I talked about the musician Gustavo Santaolalla, again, probably botched from that pronunciation, and he isn't a regular employee of Naughty Dog, as he is an Argentine musician and leader of the bands Acro Eros and Saluna. But he was one of the reference of his country's national music be the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s, meaning his music was quite iconic and memorable. So naturally, Naughty Dog really wanted to hire him to contribute towards the game's iconic soundtrack. Permissions. Whenever a game uses assets, they must consider what copyright those assets come under. If they wish to use copyrighted material, then they must garner the permissions of the respective copyright holders to do so. Things falling under copyright include music, film, photography, and art. Even a person's likeness is considered as copyright, so what a person looks like. So when designing characters, developers must be careful to avoid designing characters that take from the likeness of real-world people, or else they can get into legal issues with a person who feels as though their likeness has been ripped off. This is exactly what happened with Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. One of the characters in the game, Ellie, is voiced and acted out by Ashley Johnson, who of course signed a contract giving Naughty Dog permission to use her likeness for the character. However, Ellie herself looks and sounds like Ellen Page, as well, due to the similarities the actual actresses themselves possess in real life. In the AMA interview, it was mentioned to Paige that Ellie looked and sounded like her, so much so that almost everyone assumed it was her within the role. By the interviewee, to which Paige responded, "I guess I should be flattered that they ripped off my likeness, but I am actually acting in a video game called Beyond Two Souls, so it was not appreciated," purely because she was in a game competing against The Last of Us, so all of that makes sense as to why she was offended so easily. Because of this, many Twitter users were confused between the real-life Paige and the virtual Ellie, but Paige hated the credit, even directing some Twitter users to her actual actress, Ashley Johnson. So you can kind of see in this little summary table right here that Ashley Johnson and Ellen Page in real life look incredibly similar, and so do the characters that they played in their respective games, Beyond Two Souls and The Last of Us, for Jodie and Ellie alike. So yes, you've got to be very, very careful when you choose actors that look similar to other actors. Page and Johnson don't look dissimilar in real life, as you can see in the image above, and as I just explained to all of you, but there is enough uniqueness between them to distinguish between the two in real life, but it's much harder to do so in Beyond Two Souls, and for character Jodie, as played by Paige, and for Last of Us, that character right there, known as Ellie, by Johnson. The main problem here is the uncanny valley effect, the description of when the degree of an object's resemblance to a human being relates to their emotional attachment to such an object. So in this case, we look at Jodie and Ellie from these different games, and because they look similar, since their actresses Johnson and Page look so similar, then we assume that they were both done by the same actress, that being Page in this case, which masks the differences found in the likeness of these actresses, making these characters harder to tell apart and look more similar to one another than their real-life actresses. Naughty Dog didn't get into any legal problems over this, because despite the similarities, they weren't actually using the likeness of Paige, so no legal actions have been done against them, and they still, all they did is stir up a little confusion. Naughty Dog even stated that it was a pain to fit Ellie to Johnson's performance. Creative director of the game, Neil Druckmann, noted that the development team decided to modify Ellie's model to better reflect Ashley's personality and also resemble a slightly younger teen more fitting to the story. After a few months of development, we're happy with the final result shown in the cinematic we have released today, and hope for fans like her too. So of course, a cinematic trailer is a trailer which focuses around how the game looks, rather than a gameplay trailer which focuses around how it plays. So the cinematic trailers would have showcased more of how Ellie looked, and of course, the quote right here is explaining about how the development team were quite happy with how it all turned out. Permissions were also required for things like music put into the game, but since Naughty Dog hired Gustavo Stellonio personally to compose the game's original soundtrack, they fell under no copyright infringement, so no legal action was taken against the developers nor the game itself. And it's very important not to get into legal action, because that can cost fines, which is very costly to a game's production. And worse yet, for lawsuits can of course take time, which again can waste a lot of money within a game's production, because that's a game which could instead be spent making the game rather than having to deal with a lawsuit, mind you. So yes, you don't want any, you don't want to get into any legal action, especially not as a developer, because that gives you bad representation, and you really want to get work from publishers. You really need publishers to fund for your game, so you need that good representation in order to acquire that work, mind you. But now we're going to move on to materials. Game developers can choose to either create or source their assets, which means that they can either build materials up from scratch or import sources from other libraries. Other source, open source even, is software free for anyone to use, so developers can use these without copyright infringement. The best sourced assets, though, are locked behind licenses, which the developers will need to pay the owners of that source to acquire the license and use that asset. Using assets without the creator's consent or license even when free, can still result in legal problems, as you could be using an asset illegally, which causes major problems for developers as they can be sued for a lot of money, or it can prevent a game from even being released, making it impossible to get money back from a project, making the development of the game a waste of time and money. Developers use sourced assets, since even the ones which cost money tend to be cheaper than paying an employee to create these assets from the ground up. They just need to be sure that assets they are using are acquired under legal conditions. Luckily, Naughty Dog had most of their assets, including their own in-house engine, which they used for the generation upgrade from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3. So lighting, rendering, and framing were all done using this engine. They also used Allegro and Lisp for 3D modeling, but those models were built from the ground up, as they did not import things. Again, it was their own assets, because they have imported footage from their mocap studios to have pre-rendered animations, and they will have simply placed their own 3D models over the footage to make the more realistic and detailed expressions of our character models for their animations, as once again I have expressed previously, and I am repeating for the sake of effect. Rather than importing models from external sources and the software itself, Naughty Dog had the license to, so there were no legal issues here. Of course, they would have had to pay for Allegro and Lisp, but as long as they are paying for it, the software companies themselves are binding to a contract with them the moment they purchase the license, and cannot sue them for utilizing it, so to say. Legal requirements. There are many legal issues affecting games which developers must be aware of to avoid legal problems which can be costly for their studios and mean that the game they are working on can't even be released. First and foremost is the Copyrights and Patents Act 1988, meaning that you can't plagiarize work of literature, music, or art without permission of the copyright holder. So this would have had to have gone as early back as the writing of the game, ensuring that its story was unique in execution to anything else. If its execution followed any other works of literature, whether that was a book, a film, a TV show, a video game, it doesn't matter what medium it was. If it slightly resembled the execution of the story in any way, then that would count as plagiarism and could be sued for by the holder of the original works. Which, you can have similar stories, you know, this is a zombie apocalypse, it's not exactly a new story. But it's all about the execution of that story, which determines whether it's plagiarized or not. If you have a character in a zombie apocalypse that's shot and put into a coma and then wakes up and finds the apocalypse surrounding him 5 months later, and then he goes on a search to find his wife and his son, that leads him to a city overwhelmed by zombies where he's saved by fellow survivors, which eventually take him back to another group of survivors where his wife and son just so happen to be. I've basically explained the pilot of Walking Dead right there, so if The Last of Us followed that same execution line for line, then the creator of The Walking Dead could have sued Naughty Dog over that, but of course, because the execution of their apocalyptic world is unique, there is no need for legal pursuance there. Games which use original assets like The Last of Us, as long as they don't steal copyrighted works, are fine legally, and can even copyright their own work so it's not stolen by competing developers. The developer itself upholds this right as long as elements of the game aren't made by other consultants or subcontractors. Publishers and developers have an interesting legal relationship, since publishers are the companies pouring money into the game so it can be marketed and distributed, meaning they get a large amount of the money that the game earns. However, developers own the IP, aka the intellectual property of the game itself, and are often contracted through royalties to get a percentage of the profit of the game for themselves. Publishers stealing the IP off of the developer or not giving them the money that they generated often goes against their contract and is illegal for the publisher to do so. Likewise, it's also illegal for the developer to refuse the publisher's rights of their portion of money or rights to the marketing and distribution of the game. Since Naughty Dog is the developer, that's what they had to be cautious of, but once again they didn't run into any legal issues here because they have a stable and good relationship with Sony. Of course, creators of the PlayStation, which is the console that they were developing the game for. And even third-party developers like Rockstar, whenever they put their games onto a console, even if they aren't published by Sony. They still need to give a portion of the profits to Sony for utilizing their software and their console in order to run and develop their game, mind you. So Red Dead Redemption 2, a portion of every copy sold of that game would have had to have gone to Sony if you bought it on PlayStation 4, or to Microsoft if you bought it on Xbox One, for example. Finally, are the laws of advertisement. Since Sony published the game, it was up to them to market the game, which meant that they had to be careful to certain marketing laws, or with certain marketing laws, to ensure not to break them, particularly that of the UK, to ensure that they could distribute the game legally, as going against those laws during the marketing of the game could make it legal for those games to be sold at retail, hence losing the game a huge potential market for profits and making it lose money overall. And these laws are going to vary from country to country, so you need to bear that in mind every single time you create a trailer. Sometimes they'll need to create a trailer hundreds and hundreds of times over, the same one, just for different countries, mind you. Now, those laws, specifically for the UK, make it so that the marketing of the game must be accurately detailed so customers know exactly what the product is. In this game, what the game is, so that they know what they're buying. And then they also need to make sure that everything is legal when the game is being sold, which is very important for the game to go through all of these legal checks and regulatory bodies in order to release the game with proper age ratings and ensure that it is not an illegal product, as selling games to people below the game's age rating is treated as an illegal act in the same way as selling cigarettes or alcohol to minors can be handled. Truthful and honest or being truthful and honest even, is also important, so the product doesn't lie about things such as statistics or critics' quotations, and it must be socially responsible so the game doesn't ensure any illegal activity to those under the legal age rating of the game. So if a game, for example, has missed drug use, then it must be rated as an 18 game, so that then under 18s aren't playing it and aren't conducting these illegal activities. Luckily though, Sony didn't break any of these laws when marketing the game in the UK, so the game was able to be retailed just fine under a PEGI 18 rating due to the violence, mind you. But now we get to move on to regulatory bodies and trade unions, which basically means that I get to talk about what I was just previously mentioning about in much greater detail. Regulatory bodies are the companies which give games an appropriate age rating based on their content. This way, it warns parents about what games they are buying for their kids, avoiding children from being exposed to extreme violence or sexual actions. PEGI are the regulatory bodies for Europe. It used to be BBFC, but that's clearly changed since. Whereas regulatory bodies for America are ESRB, which is why they have the M for T, for A for adult, for R ratings and everything. Whereas the UK have the PEGI 3, 7, 12, 16 and 18. Then the regulatory body plays through parts of the game themselves. Most games are far too big and have far too many scenarios to account for to test absolutely everything. So they just do a basic check to ensure it lines up with the survey that was provided by the developers originally. So if it doesn't, then the developer needs to go through the entire survey all over again, and the game's rating shall be increased, unless certain things are censored and taken out of the game so it can maintain its original age rating. Developers can't sell their game at retail until it has an appropriate age rating. Not being specific enough with the regulatory bodies can be very damaging for the developer and the game itself financially, as going through this loop constantly, again, wastes time, a constant theme of this video. Age ratings are also used to restrict those who can buy certain games at retailers, so 18 games can only be purchased by people of 18 years of age and above, so 18 rated games are treated the same way as alcohol and cigarettes in that respect. The Last of Us was rated by PEGI just like all games in Europe, whilst ESRB gave it an M17+ rating. The difference in ratings comes from a difference in culture. PEGI work in correlation with European governments, so governments like Germany, for example, are far more harsh on the video game content they allow. Because of this, European versions of the game had to be censored online, so blood splattered with certain weapons rather than heads exploding, and disembodiment in comparison between the US and European versions of the game. So, yeah, rather than a rather than a head even completely exploding and being dismembered in the US version instead of the European version, just had a small blood splat. You know, that was violent enough for the German government, so to say. Basically, Last of Us still got Peggy's highest rating because the game is very violent and has a lot of profanity and drug use, but ESRB's highest rating, adults only, despite being the same age, is a much stricter rating, which only the very worst of games get, at least in terms of adult content, in which Last of Us didn't suit that bar. Hence, it got a mature rating instead, which, despite that being 17+, is basically the same as Peggy's 18 rating. ESRB gave Last of Us a mature 17+ rating based on combat sequences that can be quite long and feature screams of pain, realistic gunfire, and blood splatter. Attacks can even result in dismemberment, and body parts are depicted in some areas, like chopping blocks, for example, where cannibals can be found in the game, and cutscenes depict intense acts of violence, including the death of children and adults being executed at point-blank range. One character makes sexual remarks about an adult magazine, but nothing is specifically shown. Finally, the words fuck and asshole are heard a lot throughout the game. I had to censor that in the essay, mind you, but now that I'm recording a YouTube video for it, I can swear like a trucker, in other words. But yes, the main differences in culture is going to come from the fact that in America, or in the US, so to say, ESRB gives more harsher ratings to games that depict sexual nudity, so to say, because that's more offensive to a US demographic than it is to a European demographic, whereas in Europe, violence is considered far more worse and threatening to a child's innocence than what sex and nudity is. So that's primarily why, despite Last of Us is incredibly violent, it got a slightly lower rating in the US, because it doesn't feature anything that the US find most offensive, such as that sex and nudity I was talking about previously. Trade unions are organisations associated with the workers in a certain trade, groups of trades or professions formed to protect and further their rights and interests. Basically, they are there to ensure the rights of workers are upheld in a certain trade of certain mediums, such as films and games alike. They often work in companionship to the government. Such companies are not available in the UK specifically for games, but there are companies which work alongside games to better their quality in financial endeavours, such as Tiger and Ikeo, both which aim to make UK gaming a better place for those working in the gaming industry and those buying the games that are created by the industry. Basically meaning they work on quality to not necessarily on law or requirements, or at least that's what it seems their purpose is. However, the US has had much more regulatory bodies for gaming, known as SAG-AFTRA, which looks specifically at voice acting, ensuring voice actors are treated properly, or else they may go on strike, as what has occurred in the past. A writer's strike occurred in 2008 as writers were frustrated by the poor treatment by studios, which heavily impacted films like Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen and X-Men Origins Wolverine, which are notoriously criticised for awful writing due to that strike even. Since Naughty Dog developed Last of Us, were based in America, these were the trade unions that they'd need to use. Luckily, though, the studio treated their writers and actors fairly, so there was no need for Naughty Dog to get into legal action with SAG-AFTRA, which is great since it meant the game was far less costly and took far less time to finalise, since they didn't need to worry about spending time in lawsuits or even possibly losing money to them. Locations. In the game itself, you can explore American cities in the states of Texas, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. Their aim was to take iconic cities and make their look post-apocalyptic, with spores and plant life having completely taken over the scenery. I'm sure cast members travel to these locations to get sketches of their structure and appearance to make them better reflected in the game. Iconic structures are used in the game to point the players in the right direction. Things like tall buildings and bridges to direct the players' right attention without needing to tell them where exactly to go in the form of a way marker. So it's quite clever level design, actually. Besides field trips to these locations to get a better understanding of how to accurately replicate them in the game, the game itself was made in California, Santa Monica, which the studio for Naughty Dog is situated at. Time. The Last of Us started development in October 2009, right after Uncharted 2 Among Thieves was released, and it was released in June 2013, meaning the game spent around 3 years and 8 months in development. That's including pre-production, production, and post-production. Whilst The Last of Us never had any delays since the staff working on the game met deadlines absolutely fine, The Last of Us Part 2 has been delayed, pushed from a vague 2018 release date to an even more vague 2019 release date, until it finally got its finalized release date in 2020, only for that to get pushed back a further 3 months after the distributors for the game all had reduced workforce, so to say. Critical reception. The game received very good reviews, which many sites claimed for it to be Naughty Dog's newest masterpiece. IGN gave it a 10 out of 10, Eurogamer a 10 out of 10, GameSpot a 9 out of 10, IMDb and Metacritic, which are both user-based sites, gave it a 9.8 out of 10 and a 9.5 out of 10 respectively, which gave the game an average review score of 9.7 out of 10 between critics and gamers alike. The general consensus was that The Last of Us consisted of an amazing story, great characters, superb gameplay, and fantastic immersion, which I myself can absolutely agree with, as you saw from my review last week. Not only did the game do well critically, it also did very well commercially. It sold 6.27 million on PS3 and 6.49 million on the PS4, making them a total sales of 12.78 million. Now I'm going to presume that the main reason it sold better on the PS4 is because the PS4 system itself sold better than the PS3, so more people owned the PS4, so more people were granted the opportunity to actually buy the game and play the game on that system, mind you. For that, and also it was the dominant port of the game, with it looking better, it having better animations and a better slightly better physics engine to it, and slightly smoother gameplay thanks to the software the PS4 could provide for a HD remaster. And also the fact that it came out so shortly after the original Last of Us and came out at that discounted price, not to mention allowed for people who love the first Last of Us to enjoy it and play a more dominant port of it, or for people who missed it on the PS3 to easily pick it up on the PS4. So overall, it's just its domination on the PS4 taking full advantage of the software and the fact, or the hardware even, and the fact that the PS4 system itself sold better copies that allowed the remaster of Last of Us to sell slightly better than its original rendition on the PS3. At least that's my speculation behind it. Critical reception, marketing, and a really fleshed out pre-production all contributed to this success, as they really helped this game to sell. Now, we're going to move on to the evaluation and conclusion. As you just read from the reception, this game did fantastically well critically, moving on to become one of video games' highest rated games of all time, something in which many awarded for PlayStation 3's best game, including Watch Mojo, IGN, and Top Games ranking on YouTube. A lot of these great reviews stemmed from the game's stellar storytelling. As we know already, that was one of the hardest parts of the game's pre-production. It started with many failures, as Druckmann pitched it 4 times and all 4 times it failed him. But he never gave up on it. After tweaking it for many years, he finally came up with something worth making. Through Druckmann's determination to make the best game he possibly could, it allowed us to land at the story which gamers around the world praise for its excellent character development and sophistication, and the mistakes and failures Druckmann made ultimately led to this astonishing creation of his. Without that failure, the story never would have been as good as it turned out, and as such, the game never would have been as well received or move on to sell as many copies as it did. The game was also praised for its realistic graphics, showing that all of that money put into motion capture shoots was worth it, because that's what contributed to the game's realistic looking graphics and animations. So therefore, if you weigh up the benefits and drawbacks, whilst the mocap was expensive, overall the reputation that its look it added to the game, and the fact that that helped it garner greater reviews and greater sales, ultimately made that the costs of that motion capture worth it in terms of returning on their investment and creating an absolute masterpiece from process. Another great party of the game was the great game's soundtrack, which has become iconic over time. So Naughty Dog are making that extra effect to hire external musicians even, such as Gustavo Santaolalla, to contribute towards the game's soundtrack. Most certainly helped as in the game's success both critically and commercially. Basically what I'm saying here is that the investments and decisions made by Naughty Dog were wise, and that all of the money put into the game is what led to it becoming one of the most successful games ever made, both commercially and critically. In conclusion, the game's expenses most certainly paid off, as it has sold around 13 million copies and never got into much legal action, so it never lost money and was released just fine, as censorships of the online game made it possible for the game to be released in regions outside the US. Enough about the straight facts behind the pre-production of this game. It's time to get personal in this video. So, the person who actually introduced me to the first Last of Us game was a friend I had back at secondary school, as we call it here in the UK, middle school for Americans, and so naturally this friend became very close to me during this time because it was a rough period in my life where I didn't have the most friends, and so I often wound up feeling alone and quite isolated from my fellow classmates, because that's what they were to me. They were classmates, not actual friends, and so naturally I was missing out on a lot of social cues, and with my anxiety I never really had the confidence to really just go up and strike a conversation with people. So naturally there were plenty of things bogging down my life, but then Farah came into it and he really helped me out in the fact that he increased my confidence tenfold by being an incredibly humble human being and an incredible friend at that. He would get high grades than everyone. He was so incredibly smart, and yet he would never brag about it. In fact, the first thing he'd do is congratulate you on your grade, regardless of what you accomplished. You know, he's always confident that people would try their best, and so just his attitude, it was so enlightening. And so Farah, turns out he was a big fan of the first Last of Us game, and I got the game in a huge bundle that my cousin bought me for my birthday. And so naturally, because I got so many games, I kind of overlooked it at first, being like, oh, it's just another PlayStation 3 game for me to eventually get around to. I instantly put it to the top of my playlist once Farah told me about his love for the game. And I played through it, I beat it in about 3 sittings because I instantly fell in love. I did struggle because during this time I was very bad at video games, especially ones which required skill in combat like The Last of Us did. And me and Farah just got to talking about it, and it increased our friendship even further. So I kind of connect The Last of Us to that close friend of mine, whom unfortunately he moved away, so he doesn't even live in the UK anymore, and I haven't seen him in years. So a lot of my great memories of Last of Us also relate to my great memories with Farah, talking to him about that game and what I thought about it, because I first played through it and like I said, I enjoyed it. I got really hooked. But when I bought my PlayStation 4, that's when I really started to get into gaming, and I went back and got Last of Us Remastered, and it was during that second playthrough where I truly fell in love with the game. You know, I had it on a harder difficulty, so I had to be more wise approaching combat and all that. I really invested myself over in the cutscenes, and because I was smarter, so I could have a stronger grasp of the character arcs that they were working around with and the themes. And when the ending came around, the perfect culmination of Joel's arc, I suppose, I just appreciated it even more. So Last of Us is a game that, despite how depressing it gets, because trust me, this is not a light-hearted game, it's not necessarily made to be fun, but it's that impact it has that stays with you, and it's why it's so strongly remembered. It's why it's beloved by its community. Yes, the second game came out absolutely dumped on this first film and split up the fan base, but if you take out part 2 and isolate this first game, it is fantastic. I'm struggling to put words to its perfection, in all honesty. It's easily one of, if not the greatest PlayStation exclusive to have ever been made. I mean, I'm a huge God of War fan, that does kind of top it for me, same for Horizon, but it's a linear game played to perfection, because a lot of the story is told through combat, and combat gets really insane, and you fall in love with these characters and what happens to these characters, the fates that they behold. Oh, it is brutal, and the kind of dread and horror it builds up. No other game comes close to leaving this much of an impact on just for industry as a whole. Like, this was an industry-defining title. Only few games can accomplish such things. And I'm not the only one who's on this video to gush about the success and raw awesomeness behind this game. I think it's about time we switched over to my good friend, ShadowDragon.
Hello, the name's Bobby. You might know me as ShadowDragon, or you might know me as one of the biggest Last of Us fans there is. This game released 9 years ago, and I can't believe that it's been 9 years already. The time's just flown by. But when this game came out initially on the PlayStation 3, I was only 10 years old at the time, so it was slightly above my age range, but some of my favorite YouTubers at the time, your standard, 2013 gaming YouTubers, PewDiePie, Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, to name a few, all played through this game on their YouTube channels, and I saw some of their videos, and it looked pretty cool. It looked like a game where you go around, shoot zombies, and just have a good time. That could not have been further from what the reality of this game was. But at the time that it came out, I had an Xbox 360 because most of my friends were on Xbox, and so I couldn't play the game initially. And then when they remastered it for the PS4, it's actually one of the main reasons that I switched back to PlayStation for the PS4, was to play The Last of Us Remastered. So it's one of the first games I played when I got my PlayStation 4. I played through it, was completely blown away. I was what, 11, 12 at the time, so I was pretty scarred from some of the things that happened, but the story just resonated with me so much, and it quickly became my favorite game I'd ever played through. And I think that's why this game sticks out so much and why it's remembered the way that it is today, is because of its story. I mean, before this game, really, you didn't see anything like it in the gaming industry. You really didn't. It was all just kind of the same carbon copy, across all genres. And so to take such a big leap into the storytelling, I don't know for sure, but at the time, just the amount of cutscenes that were in this, and the extensive behind the scenes stuff. If you go back and look at the mocap that all the voice actors did, they weren't just voice acting their their little models or whatever. They were actually physically acting, doing the motion capture for their characters, and just went the extra mile to immerse you into the game. And that's something Naughty Dog has been good at for years. I mean, since, that's what Naughty Dog is known for, is, not just bringing you in, but the accessibility features that they have. Part 2 was probably the most accessible video game of all time, I think, at the time that they released it, but just their ability to really bring you into the story and make you feel, especially right off the bat. I mean, you play through that intro, and it's like, bam, we are not messing around. It tells you exactly what type of game it's going to be. It's going to be brutal, it's going to be shocking, and nobody is safe. If they can do that to, spoiler alert, I don't know if Ignite is doing some spoilers in this video, but spoiler alert for the next 10 seconds. If you're going to do that to a little girl at the beginning of the freaking video game, there's nothing is off limits. So it really just sets the tone for you right off the get-go, and then it really just doesn't let up from there. And I love it. I mean, maybe I'm a little maybe that's a little crazy, but that's awesome, and it's probably one of the main reasons that it's still to this day my favorite game that I've ever played through on any console. So not to take too much of your time, but just some closing remarks here as I wrap things up. I know over the past couple of years, especially since the release of Part 2, which was 3 years ago now, which is crazy to say, it's left maybe a sort of a bad taste in some fans' mouths. Definitely split the community. But, you know, set that aside, set part 2 aside, and just sit back and appreciate what they were able to accomplish in part 1, which is now 9 years old. I think we should celebrate part 1 in all of its glory, which, if you take it by itself, is nothing short of a masterpiece. It's the fact that it has such a big fan base to this day, I think, speaks wonders for it. And you know, it spawned so many. It spawned a second video game, it spawned a remaster, a remake, an online factions version, and now a big budget HBO TV show production, which I cannot wait for. I'm so hyped for that show. So happy anniversary to The Last of Us, a game that, as corny as it is to say, but it really is true, it changed my life, and I don't look at any video game the same now. I really don't. It's my favorite video game that I've ever played through, and it's 9 years old. I'm getting old, man. Happy birthday, Last of Us. Thank you for having me on your channel, Ignite, and enjoy playing that game on the big screen. I'm so jealous, man. That's awesome. See you guys.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate how that cinema screening didn't really pan out, but without further ado, we're going to look to the future of the Last of Us series. I previously mentioned God of War. Well, its upcoming sequel, Ragnarok, has unfortunately been delayed to make room for the remake of the original Last of Us on PS5. Their release dates effectively switched, so now for Last of Us Part 1, as it's been rebranded by Sony, releases on September 2nd, and I'll definitely be there day 1 for it. You could make the argument that this game isn't all that necessary, as the game is less than a decade old, and it still has its PlayStation 4 remaster, making it playable on the PS5. In fact, any PlayStation Plus members get that title for free when they purchase a PlayStation 5 as part of the PlayStation Plus collection, but that's not going to stop me from buying the game day 1 anyway. I can't wait to replay through this legendary story, which has been rebuilt from the ground up for the innovative PlayStation 5 graphics and controls. It'll become an even more immersive experience with technology like the adaptive triggers. Obviously, this remake isn't the only Last of Us media for us to look forward to. As ShadowDragon mentioned, we have the HBO show coming, which no doubt, being in the UK, knowing my luck, I'll struggle to even get around to watching. But that doesn't take away from my excitement for it. After almost 2 hours, I think it's about time we wrapped up this video. The main takeaway is that the development team behind this game were really passionate, and the talent paid off in a revolutionary way, resulting in one of the best games ever made, which still holds up to this day. Many people, including myself and ShadowDragon, have fallen in love with the series, and we can't wait to see more. With that being said and done, this video is coming to an end, and I want to thank you all so much for watching. By merely clicking on this video, you've shown support and helped it garner recognition so it can reach many of the viewers here on YouTube. I'd love to see you take the extra step and leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Also, be sure to comment below and push that subscribe button whilst you're down there. By clicking elsewhere on screen, you can either check out a video that's specifically picked out for you, or you can check out the rest of the playlist for the series you just watched. Before ending off, I'd like to thank all of my Blazing Knights and Scorching Dragons whose support helped make these videos possible. I'll be seeing you in the next video, and until the moment arises, peace!